Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Sebastian Asprella. Sebastian is the CEO and co-founder of ThinkOrbital. Sebastian, welcome to the Future of Space.
Daniel, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. And I appreciate also your audience as well for listening to the podcast. Thank you.
Well, I'm really looking forward for this conversation, and I want to know more about ThinkOrbital, your journey, how you got to where you are, and the team that you're working with right now. But before we go there, could you share with us 3 words that for you capture the essence of space?
The 3 words that capture the essence of space for me, it's first, opportunity, followed by exploration, leading to prosperity.
Love it. Prosperity. Yes, indeed. Now, there's a science story of going to space. I mean, I don't think that we need to really explain why. There's a technology story of going to space, but what do you think is the human story of going to space?
I think we as humans or living entities, we've always strived for mobility, looking for what is next. In a way, the necessity to be able to survive the environment. And I'm talking even before we kind of lived in these big cities, and our life became a lot more comfortable to some extent. And I think that lives inside of us, in each one of us, from the moment where we had to migrate, as a community from one place to the other, perhaps for foraging, or else just before we started going into farming. So that sense of the need to explore, to look for that opportunity, to look for that prosperity is ingrained in all of us. And I think that's kind of the essence of why also space. If you look at why humans have moved across the different vasts of land across our lovely planet, also captures that essence. And to me, naturally, the next frontier is space. And even at the personal level, I have, family members that have migrated from Europe, from Central America. Sort of my DNA itself is built of explorers. So to me, since I'm a child, it just became, in my mind, it was kind of a natural next step, that we would go out, amongst the stars, and not just imagine, think about it, but really moving into the stars, and be able to be among the stars beyond perhaps our orbits, but into other bodies like the moon and Mars and beyond. So yeah, I think it's part of our DNA to explore, to go for that adventure, to look for that element of prosperity and expand our civilization, but also our consciousness as well. To be able to realize that everything that we know of, everything that happened to humanity happened in this sort of tiny blue pale dot in the middle of the vastness of space and darkness. So naturally, I think that that next stage of evolution will happen once we can broaden humanity's access to space.
I mean, this is what the human species has done. We take what nature has given us, and then we build on top of it. I mean, nature didn't give us any clothes, and didn't give us a roof over our head. We created. I mean, we could say that all of those are technologies that allow us to go further, and then we invent the wheel, and we invent ways to move around. But to think that nature, we have enough from what nature gives us. Well, none of us would be here if that was the case. And if you start from that perspective, then it's just a question of figuring out these technologies that allow us to go to the next place. And if we don't go, it's not necessarily because we don't want to go. It's just because we haven't found the right tools or the right technology. Space, when we were on the beach looking out over the horizon, we wanted to go beyond the horizon. It was just a question of finding a ship or a way to that would take us there. And then the stars has always been that place of calling. It was just impossible for us to imagine that we could go there. Now we do have the technology, and obviously we're looking into making that next frontier and looking back. And I think that every time that we reach these destinations, whether it's the top of the mountain, looking back into the village and where we grew up, whether it's the plane looking down into that, in the world that usually you move, the in a 2D level. Now from space, looking at the planet and seeing the Earth in context of space, this is where it changes your perception and your experience of life, because now you see the context of where you grew up and what you do. And we talk about the overview effect. And by the way, I mean, I'm pretty sure you would without a hint of hesitation, going to moon or going to space or going to Mars. Would your girlfriend follow you?
I think she probably goes first. She's very adventurous. So definitely, I think that's a yes. Not without fear, and I think fear it's the reason also why we stay alive. But that's, yeah, definitely 100%.
Now, you grew up in Argentina. Now you're in Amsterdam. So obviously, we were talking earlier about that gene, or that reality that each of us exists because someone left their nest at some point. There's one ancestor who actually left and migrated to a new place. Every single person in America, in South America, or where you want to start, but we all exist because of those migrations. And there's a future ahead of us that will exist because of that leap that we're about to make. And there's a place inside of me that I cannot rob that future of those for them, just on the pretext that we cannot push that next boundary. Where, like, was space always an interest for you, or it grew with time, or was it what is the journey between Sebastian in Argentina and where you are today as a CEO of ThinkOrbital?
I think that's a great question, and I love the way you eloquently put that sensation of adventure that humanity has when you leave your village and you go up the summit of that mountain and you look beyond and what you want to do. And I think we all have it, perhaps different degrees. For me, it started since I almost have consciousness, going up to my parents' house terrace, looking at the stars, and in a way feeling that I belong there. And I didn't make much sense. I don't know how old I was, perhaps, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old. But that really sense of longing for the stars, which I only kind of unraveled as I started growing older, and pairing that with a love for building stuff. Since I'm quite young, I love building stuff. I still love breaking stuff and then repairing them as well. And with a good friend of mine who was also quite into technology and stuff, just building stuff. And that led me to want to study a technology-related field, and I did that for a few years in electromechanics. Great school. It was like kind of half boarding, where you go at 7 something in the morning and you have all your technical workshops, from electronics to electricity to welding to computing, and then in the afternoon having the theoretical elements. And my view at the time was that I would have loved to be a pilot, a fighter pilot. Like I think many people that I talk in the field, and then to be able to have that as a kind of a leap jump into some sort of astronaut role. But unfortunately, my eyesight, although my right eye is perfect side, the left one it isn't. So that kind of has a limiting factor in itself. But that didn't stop me. And anyway, talking about exploration itself, when I concluded my technical studies, I was very fond of the human experience, how the human mind works. So I did a foundation in psychology, and that was still in Buenos Aires. I did live abroad when I was a kid, so I'm kind of, but I went back with my parents to Argentina, so I did my studies there, foundation in psychology, and then I decided to explore again. And that sort of sense of exploration led me to go to the UK. where my next studies was actually in business. I was very fond of building products, building stuff, looking at it, especially from robotics and some sort of autonomy in robotics, the human mind and how the human mind works and how can that be replicated in a machine. But what I was missing, I realized, was the business side of things. How can you actually make this venture profitable? How can you actually stand up a team? So I did a combined degree at the University of London, which was fascinating. Also because I did it whilst already had a job and a family, so that also gives you a sense of being able to push yourself when you wake up at 7 in the morning and you finish at 11 in the evening with with two kids, but also to be able to apply that knowledge as I went through. And I'm very grateful that I had quite a successful career, mostly around technology and leadership roles. I developed and delivered 18 products, stood up 25 teams, approximately over so about 500 million euros worth of expenditure. But in the back of my mind, it was about going back to that deep tech, to space, because I love the tech, but also what we're talking about, the next frontier. We had a gap between, especially since the shuttle was decommissioned to now SpaceX starting to come back and providing us with that cadence of launch, reliability, higher payload. But what do you do next? What do you next when you realize that, okay, that's the transport side of things, but you need to have a destination. And the destination, I guess, at some point will be probably planetary destination. It does make sense. But in between that, you need to be able to have high volume space, to be able to industrialize space, again, to have that sweet spot of innovation where you can build a product that is technologically feasible, that you develop a market for that product, and you reach out to customers, satisfy their needs and their pain points, but ultimately that you can make it profitable. And that's where we came in with my co-founders. We launched ThinkOrbital just over a year ago, about a year and a half ago, and to be able to provide that volume space. And that volume at the beginning, it's not necessarily focused for human radio activities. It's not for tourism, but it's really to be able to augment existing free-flying space stations, provide them for storage space at a much lower cost. We're talking about the magnitude reduction of cost compared certainly to the ISS, but other alternative technologies, and to be able to carve that niche, to be able to also provide. Like recently, we were awarded 2 contracts by the U.S. Space Force to be able to provide a platform to deliver servicing for other space assets, as well as assembly, even recycling of those space assets. But always with a grand vision to be able to accelerate humanities to space through commercialization. And I'll just mention this perhaps briefly before I keep going on a tangent. But if we look at most of humanity's exploration, there's always been with an opportunity, and that sense of opportunity and prosperity on site, where if it was a clear mandate by a king for an explorer to go out, venture for a potential return or reward by bringing back gold or whatever it may be, or even from a forager perspective, to be able to move to the next forest, to be able to have that access to those nuts, to those fruits, to be able to feed themselves and their community as well. So I think it's key that when we think about space exploration, we also look at it from a commercial angle, not necessarily from a capitalist perspective, but also because that is the fuel for us to be able to access space in a way that is profitable, in a way that is sustainable, and in a way that actually can be expanded to more and more people, right? Because you bring the cost down, and that's effectively what we're working on.
I mean, this, you were talking about the kings and the queens. I mean, the idea that billionaires like today, are involved in the space race is nothing new. The billionaires have always been involved in pushing the boundaries and funding these grand expeditions that would not make sense unless you're the kings and the queens. I mean, back then there was, the funding a ship so that they could find a new route, a spice route, or resources. Today it's the billionaires, and then after that the trade starts to make sense, and then you start you can scale up, and then it starts to become more available. I mean, the cell phones were exactly the same thing, computers were the same thing. We can even credit, even credit where people, everybody has credit today. Back in the days, it was something that was reserved only for the super rich, and that, and then it changed. So the cycle is has always been there, will continue to do so even in the future. But I think we just need to remind ourselves of that process. Um, and then it's, when we talk about where we are today, for me, I'm like, we're, maybe we're not even at the European migration. It's like really at the beginning where we're developing the technology of ships that can cross the ocean. And we're getting all excited because we're talking about ships. But like you just said, these ships are only the medium ultimately to get you across, between point A and point B, between North America and Europe. And whether we decide to settle on planets or moons that have different gravities, or we become more consistent in the way that we migrate out, is by creating those artificial colonies that where we have a better control on the gravity. But this is where the human experience is going to be taken. And I want you to tell us a little bit about how, because I think that for a lot of people, it's on the planet, on Earth, the incentives to be efficient are not necessarily present because we're surrounded by resources. It's easy to create, produce, and also waste. But when you go to space, the incentives are flipped. You have to be efficient. You have to be, everything has to have a purpose, because the idea of taking an atom of transformed carbon with you and thinking that you can just open the side gate and throw it out because you're done it, would be the most ridiculous thing. You have to figure out how to be like a closed loop where everything that comes in has to stay in and be reused and recycled, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And perhaps it's just a side joke. I have the pleasure to have access to wonderful people in the industry, like yourself, Daniel, but also some people who have been into space. And one of the recurring jokes at the ISS was that my coffee today is your coffee tomorrow, because the way the water is being recycled and also moisture is being captured, because you have to be ultra efficient. And that's one of the things that perhaps, unless you start diving a little bit more on why space exploration and how it benefits Earth, you may not know how many of these spin-off technologies that have been used, for example, for water recapturing and recycling, have been actually gone into technology that we use here on Earth. Um, so to that extent, I mean, if we think about how we're planning to do space exploration, certainly going forwards, is we had this amazing laboratory circling Earth every so many minutes for over 20 years, which is the International Space Station, and that's actually to be able to understand how things behave in microgravity, to allow us as a stepping stone to be able to move to another body like the moon. Eventually, now we're actually trying to go to the moon. I'm sure your audience knows, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but to be able to set up a base on the moon, and that in itself, for it to be a stepping stone, potentially to go to Mars. So everything that we do, we kind of build upon, but none of that will replace. I mean, not certainly within the next century. I don't think. All the benefits and all the resources we have here on Earth. And that's something that we need to be very, very mindful of, not because of Earth in itself. And I was listening to one of your podcasts, and I fully agree with you, but for humanity, right? For the future of humanity, for the future of other living things, living beings here on Earth. But just going back to what you were saying earlier, as we build up the technology from the ground up, even for our team platforms that are not with the main focus of being human rated, there's a lot of things that you need to take into account for you to survive in such a harsh environment. And there is no environment like space here on Earth. I mean, there's some environments that are extreme, like Antarctica. We were talking about it earlier, or perhaps going up to the K2 or one of the sort of the high summits. But even that, you still have some level of oxygen, you have some level, you have gravity, etc. So by pushing ourselves to that limit, and I strongly believe, I may have said it earlier, that necessity is the mother of all innovation. By pushing ourselves to that limit, I think we will learn a lot more about ourselves, learn a lot more how to be more efficient, even here on Earth, and bring back those technologies that hopefully will help us reverse, some of the damage that we have done to our environment. So I see two ways that the exploration into space fits into what I had said earlier, but it brings so much benefit back to Earth, that it's just worth doing. And there's a lot of stats, and I can share that, perhaps as a follow up. In terms of looking at how many dollars in return we have for every dollar that has been spent on technology in space. So, yeah, scarcity in space helps us to understand how we can live here better and more frugal here on Earth.
I often, I mean, and probably you've heard me before, but the comparison in the 1900s when you had Tesla and Edison's and the Wright brothers were trying to power the world and take over the sky, and they were facing a lot of backlash too. They were, the Navy, the Army actually, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times saying that trying to fly was one of the most ridiculous things, to do. And people were telling Tesla and Edison that why would they waste their intellect and their time and effort and money into something that was not important to solve issues at that time. But the reality is the world that they created took care of a lot of the issues indirectly by elevating, the story and elevating those tools. And space has been doing that and will do that also. It just will, and it will never be at the expense of the earth. It's for the same reason that, when children leaves the family, it's not at the expense of the family. It's to elevate the family wealth, and everybody starts benefiting. Um,
Absolutely. I mean, if I may interject, so let's imagine for a moment a future where, and we're not inventing this at ThinkOrbital, but imagine a future where you can lift most of your heavy industry into space. And I'm not saying, the tragedy of the commons in space, where you basically, throw your junk or your radioactive material in space. And I'm saying in a way that we learned our lessons, that we're sustainable. But if you can lift your heavy industry, if you including mining, especially when it comes to rare earth metals, which are technologically very difficult to obtain in space, especially when you start looking at perhaps accessing asteroids. But we're kind of, let's say, that vision of the future, and then Earth is left as a garden of Eden, and these are the things that, especially when when you're working at 2 a.m. in the morning, these are the things that really spur you on to say, okay, we're picking up a baton from our ancestors. They have done their best. I keep saying we're standing in the shoulders of giants. What are we doing in this lifetime, this life process, which is a bleep, especially when it comes to time and space, to be able to advance that forward for the next generations. And yeah, that's I think what you, Daniel, I, and everyone who's involved, and people who I'm encouraging more people to get involved, that we need to strive for.
It's I was just reading today how the prediction of how many Mayans will have to be created if we want that vision of the battery economy that we're thinking. And I wrote a piece, earlier this year about how a battery economy won't happen without space mining. And one of the reasons that we're able to have a house with a backyard and where the emphasis is more about beauty or enjoying the backyard is because all the input that you need for you to live it's outsourced from somewhere else, and now everything that you output, all the output that you create, is taken somewhere else. The reason why in North America we have parks, and in Europe the same thing, is because all the raw material comes from other places, so therefore you can use your forest to enjoy it. Right now the problem on Earth is not the material that you can find on the planet, but the extraction and the toll, the environmental toll. So the sooner we can get our input from out of Earth, and also the sooner that we can, find a way to dispose out of Earth, then you start to have the Earth becoming exactly like a house where it's more to enjoy rather to extract the raw material that is needed, to live. So the incentives again, to go and mine an asteroid that is barren of life or has, little signs of life, rather that obviously there's no discussion compared to somewhere in the Amazon or that is rich where you have to, displace people. It's obvious, for that perspective, right?
You would think so, but when you start thinking about how much in terms of GDP is being invested in space, it's such a small fraction. And I understand the politics and I understand the difficulties, because the discourse it's really about, and there are many people who are opponents in terms of investing in space, and I understand where they're coming from. There are challenges here on Earth. I think we have been continuously in a positive spiral, but we do have blips now and again where it looks like the world is going to end. Like perhaps it feels a little bit these days. Um, but yeah, I mean that indeed should be the future where we start looking at technologies that, like you were saying, I mean that analogy about flying and the Bright Brothers, and that today we may think it's absolutely crazy, but I know, and I met, as I said, some wonderful people in the industry. There is a startup called Astroforge, and they are actually looking at developing technologies to mine asteroids to be able to have these resources captured from space. And one thing that in the past may have only been seen on a science fiction movie or a book, it's up to us. We are creating the future, so it's up to us to create that future that we want to live in. It's not, there's I, I think since I'm a kid and perhaps having been brought in or been born in Argentina, where you know you have to do things to survive. Let's put it that way. And my entrepreneurial activity started probably at the age of 6.5, 7. It kind of ingrains in your mind that unless, I mean, very silly saying, but perhaps, unless you wake up in the morning, no one's going to wake up for you. Unless you get yourself out of bed, unless you get out of the door, unless you do things, no one's going to do it for you. And I think it's up to everyone to try and you know have their part and make that future possible. And it's not hurdles, right? But still,
You were saying earlier about how, like, as in your career of engineer or tinkering, trying to fix things, part of the process is always to break things. And in fact, the reality of an innovation or a mistake, both are exactly, the path to them is exactly the same. No one is trying to make mistakes. Everybody's trying to create that innovation. It's only the hindsight that gives you the capacity to say, well, that was a mistake or that was an innovation. But no one is purposely doing things that will turn out mistakes. That sometimes the solution works in certain situation and then it stops working. But like even plastic, and that's why for me it's always important. You want to move forward with acquired wisdom rather than looking backward and trying to find someone to blame, because no one in the past did things specifically to make the future harder or more complicated to people. I mean, even plastic, when it came out, it was held to be like a great invention that would save, the environment. And then the reality changes, and then we have a problem. But that is just the nature of life. And there are decisions that we take today, thinking that it's going to be, the best decision, which might turn out later not to be the best decision. I mean, I assume that you're pretty in tune with that process as an engineering and someone is building a company who is planning to go to space.
yes, yeah, absolutely. And there are two thoughts that come to mind. One of the things that I used to exercise thought, especially when my kids were younger, was to ask them to think about what in 400 years people will think back and say how crazy these people were that they were doing this and that, like, for example, internal combustion engines or things like that. And I think that kind of, I like to call it like a pre-mortem of the situation, also helps in the thought process to try and bring a little bit of objectivity. And I think the example of plastic is spot on. I mean, when it came out, it was. I mean, I was actually reading about it not long ago. But that I think we have so much data these days about past performance, and there are ways to actually understand how certain things may end up in terms of possible scenarios, and this sort of pre-mortem concept that we cannot excuse ourselves as much as if we were 50, 100, 500 years ago. So I think sustainability needs to be at its core, not as a bumper sticker, but certainly in terms of how we design processes. And I'm a strong believer, and I mean, I love the work of SpaceX, and one of my co-founders, actually, he was instrumental in the last over more than a decade, in terms of the progress that SpaceX has done. And if you look at their history very briefly, they had some major failures. The Falcon 1 failed 3 times before they actually reached orbit successfully. And if we had this mentality of failure is not an option, then that would have meant that after the first launch, then they would have packed everything up, and we would not have reusable rockets this day, or maybe not as not with the speed of technology that they have delivered. We would not have now the opportunity very soon, and I think it's a matter of when, not if, we will have Starship be able to deliver 100, 150 to 150 tons of payload into space. We have a set of principles at ThinkOrbital in terms of how we do things generally, not just in terms of technology. But one of them is to sort of fail fast, fail hard, learn, apply that for the next iteration. Prototype when you can. Simplify the requirements. So obviously, I'm not saying them in sequence, but there is a sequence there to allow people to fail, and to fail through not for the sake of failing, of course, but to fail as a learning process. It's the same as when you fall on the street, or when you fall when you're learning to walk, right? If you were stopping yourself from walking because you could fall or fail, then you'll be in bed, or you'll be crawling. So it's kind of from the basics. It's a concept that we need I think we need to apply more and more in not just in our lives, but also in industry. Now, having said all of that, we do need to ensure, especially when it comes to aerospace, accessing quite a harsh environment, we need to have a set of defined principles that look at also risk and control, just to at least do the best we can, especially when it comes to decision making on technology, to avoid some of the catastrophes that we've seen, especially when it involves human life. If it's machines, if it's metals, of course you want to preserve your assets. But when it comes to human-related activities, I think we need to ensure that safety comes first than anything else. I know I'm going kind of on a tangent, but hopefully it makes sense.
No, absolutely. And I was thinking, I was listening to you, and the thought that was coming to my mind is, often when I tell people, and they look at the way that we are with the planet, I put them into just their own relationship with other humans. How in your marriage, let's say, you don't want to stop or dismiss someone that's your first argument. The argument could be similar to that first failure of communication, because you got two people who are different, and you want to go beyond that. You want to actually develop the skills to manage these differences. And the other thing is, how many of us I've been in situations where we know it's wrong, and then we choose to stay in them because stability and predictability has an attraction, is super powerful. So now we look at ourselves on the planet. Yes, we know the climate change is real. We know that we have an impact, but the predictability and stability of the relationship that we have with the planet has been so ingrained and so comfortable that for a lot of people, it's hard to go for the possible better world rather than just to stay, the status quo. And then understanding the psychology of that gives, I think, is a way to give empathy to what we do and who we are, as opposed to play the game of guilt and shame, and we're a bad species, and if you were taken out of the equation, it would be better. No, it would not be better. I mean, it's life is messy by design, but the process of learning and growth is just complicated. And I think that we just need to reframe the human story to empower ourselves to go through and come out, as opposed to, with the cane of guilt and just like tapping, hitting ourselves on the head and thinking that we're bad. But let's go back a little bit on Think Orbital, and because I want to know. So are you aiming to build a space station, or you guys are going to focus on building modules or certain components?
Yes. Well, I just by the way, I love your thought process. Absolutely. There's no baby that was born in the history of humanity that was thinking, I'm going to do something bad. I'm going to harm anyone else. It's just the context and how we were brought up. But anyway, that's probably for the topic of another conversation. What we're focusing, I think, Orbital is to be able to provide what we call a space platform. So to be able to provide a platform for our customers, for them to be able to manufacture assets, to be able to service their satellites, to be able to perhaps change the mission of the satellites from the modular approach. Also, there's some prospective customers that are interested to be able to provide edge computing, so basically like a data center in space, which is shielded and protected from micrometeorites, and for thermal variations, etc. So you don't have to sort of beam do the processing at the unit of the satellite, or having to beam data that you don't need. So really to be able to, the way we see it is, it's like the picks and shovels of the new space economy, to be able to provide space in space for the different industries to access space, low cost, high volume. And then, from there on, if you want to think a little bit more further afield, it's also the foundation. Perhaps you have heard or you have read, or your audience has, about O'Neill, who had envisaged sort of the so-called high frontier. And if people have not heard about him, there is a great book that he wrote, and also there is a documentary that can be accessed. But effectively, this is the sort of the core technology for you to be able to build infrastructure in space. And this so-called O'Neill cylinder is a community. It's a civilization enabling technology to be able to live, work, and play in space. So this is a huge cylinder that provides gravity, where you can actually, be able to grow crop and live there. And sometimes we focus so much on the end game, but we lose sight on the practicality, on the steps that you need to take to get there. And of course, because it's exciting, right? It's exciting to think about an O'Neill cylinder. It's exciting to be able to think about civilization and sort of colonizing Mars. I don't like the word colonize, but you know what I mean, sort of living and in Mars. But how do you get there? And again, that's why I'm very fond of the work that SpaceX has done, because they're looking at the practical steps. And for us, it's exactly the same. So we start with our core technology, which is how we design and manufacture our pressure vessels and panels that make up that space platform. How we're going to be able to pressurize that by being able to weld the panels in space. And we are focusing on developing a technology that is based on electron beam welding. So it'll be a space-rated gun that allows to weld the structure in space. You need a robotic manipulator to be able to remove the human in the loop, which is quite dangerous and is quite costly. So effectively, the robotic manipulator picks up the panel, puts them in place. We have a video render on our website. The same robotic arm with an end effector picks up the welding arm and welds the space platform. And from there on, it's opening up an opportunity for other industries. And perhaps the last comment that I have, and I had the pleasure to talk to Mike Suffradini from Axiom, and what we were talking about is we envision a future where all of the board members of all of the manufacturing industries and companies here on Earth, they're asking themselves, why are we not manufacturing space? Why are we not tapping in that possibility? And again, and going back and closing the loop, we need to be able to have those space platforms. We need to be able to have space in space. We need to have that infrastructure at a low cost to be able to broaden industry access to space.
So you're building in space. You're not building on Earth and shipping to space, but the goal is to build in space, use the micro environment, the lack of gravity environment, and build there. Correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So historically, what we have done, and again, standing in the shoulders of giants, the International Space Station, if we take that as an example, this International Space Station is made of modules, cylindrical modules, most of them, majority, that are actually have been manufactured and assembled here on Earth to be able to fit in the space inside the rocket, the fairing of a rocket, and then launch into space. And then with human activities, extravehicular activities, they have been assembled in space. So what we're proposing is, in terms of the next revolutionary stage in infrastructure in space, that instead of doing all of that on Earth and then being limited, we call it the tyranny of the fairing of the rocket, instead of being limited by that space, you actually launch the panels like a Lego space platform in a way, or those that, I don't know if you have IKEA in the US, but in Europe you have also IKEA, sort of Lego IKEA type of space platform. Then you have all the panels all stacked up. You launch them into space, and then with eventually autonomous robotic activities and the welding gun, you do all that fabrication in space.
I mean, if we go back to the analogy of the ships on water, on the ocean, like in the Europe or any migration before, it would be the same thing as like trying to build a house, put it on the ship, and then have it cross the ocean so it can build over there, as opposed to get the people or get the tools or the knowledge. Basically, you're migrating the knowledge, get the knowledge across, so that they can use the local resources and do it, because that makes a lot more sense than building where you are, put it on the rocket or on the ship, and then sending it over there.
I think that's a perfect analogy. I mean, if you wanted to do it as a one-off, if you wanted to do it, let's say, as a first incursion into the new continent, to be able to have somewhere where you can set up camp initially, that makes sense. But if you really want to build a thriving civilization, if you want to industrialize space, we need to master the technology to be able to fabricate infrastructure in space. And this is what we're focusing. This is the niche that we're focusing on, and to be able to, as I said, provide access to other industry, but also those friends and companies that are operating in space to be able to augment their product offering as well.
You're talking earlier about the question that you ask your children 400 years from now. I was recently just in Greenland, and we visited those ruins from Norse, the Norse people. The only thing, it's this famous, it's a UNESCO World Heritage. There's one big building left. That's the church, which says a lot about the energy that we put into building the construction, building the buildings that illustrate our faith into, into um, the unspoken, or the conceptual. But and then you have the gardens, and then you have the what was needed for a village. That was 700 years ago. And the people, I was standing in that church, and I was imagining if these people would see the present today, 700 years later, they would not even understand. They could not comprehend what is real today. Just the idea that there's a ship, that's anchor out. In fact, the ship is not even anchor anymore. The ship has the GPS stationary system, and where just with the bow thrusters and the propellers that turn by themselves, they can stay stable with like 2 centimeters. So you have that ship that's sitting outside, that is a self-sustainable piece of engineering, because the food have come, they can travel with food, food for 250 people for up to almost 3 weeks. Like, just the idea of all those technology, they could not even understand. And there is a future ahead of us 700 years from now that is impossible to even imagine what it's going to be, because it's so beyond our capacity to reach. So I mean, you have fun playing those games too.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And they say that advanced technology, it can become imperceptible to magic, right? And the thing is, what we can we can think about what the future may look like, but the reality is we will not know, and we will not know even with the advancements of technology and Moore's law of doubling performance every couple of years. We're there is this analogy about the chessboard, which I'm not going to go into too much detail, But the compounding effect of technology, it's just so difficult for the human brain to comprehend. And how the future will be like. It's the same. All the different use cases that came out of the internet, for example, back in the day, people would have not even been able to think about it. And I think it's going to be the same. And we can think about, well, will life become synthetic, and consciousness be uploaded into some sort of cloud? Maybe yes. Certainly, we are kind of cyborgs at this stage. We're using all the technology to be able to augment ourselves. But one thing is clear, I think, being able to move into the moon and Mars, uh, I think that's for sure. Humanity, flesh and bones. But when it comes to interplanetary, unless there is something that completely revolutionary in terms of transportation, that will definitely have to be synthetic. But yeah, I'm so excited. I believe in humanity. I believe in technology, and I'd love to be able to be there with my consciousness somehow, 700 years from now. But yeah, we'll see.
Absolutely. Now, being mindful of your time and also bringing this conversation to just a temporary pause, because I'm pretty sure that we're going to have more conversation. Sebastian, what would be, I mean, we started with three words that capture the essence of space. Now, what would be Sebastian's words of wisdom for anyone that listen, whether they are words of wisdom about the human experience or your experience as a CEO, for someone who's listening? Sebastian's words of wisdom.
I think many times it's true that love is the answer, and empathy to one another. And even when we think, we're in our darkest hours, it's just a bleep. I know it's difficult, and I do practice meditation, and I've been into retreats to try and go deeper into this. And I think it's difficult to detach necessarily ourselves from our ego, and but we are a life process. You and I, Daniel, in the scheme of things, we're just deeply, and I say this not in terms of being unimportant. We are important. We are important to ourselves, to our loved ones. But I think we need to try and take ourselves a little bit lighter, and we need to understand that as part of that light process, we are very much interconnected. We're interconnected between all of us. We're interconnected with the universe. And as part of that interconnectivity, I think we need to try and look ahead and think about what's best, for all living things, as opposed to maybe what's best for me, selfishly right now. Yeah, I don't know if that made sense, but that's good. That's what came up.
Sebastian, the we'll make sure that in the description you have links to ThinkOrbital. You're also on LinkedIn, so people can connect with you if they are interested of sending you their resume or they want to work at the. I think you have a career page, or they can just contact the companies directly. Correct?
Yes, yes. Please do connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear about everyone's story. We do have a website. We're active on social media, and on our website there is also a possibility to be able to reach out to us. Also, when it comes to participating in this wonderful adventure, and I have to say, I'm just so proud of the people that I work with beyond ThinkOrbital, but also the team, the set of advisors, our board member. It's just beyond my wildest dreams. It's an amazing journey.
I think it's a theme that comes back over and over in the space community and industry, or even what was in at IAC in Paris, is space cannot be done by yourself. The on Earth, yes, you could put a backpack and go and do whatever you want to do and build yourself a house if you want to. In space, it is a team effort. It is a collaborative effort. It's not even just one nation. It's a multitude of nations, because it's all the human experience, and more they're just It's that reality and that motivation, that inspiration of accomplishing the impossible by bringing a diverse group of different background, different knowledge, and accomplish. I mean, gosh, we have a helicopter on Mars. We have a telescope that's on an orbit that we've never been before. It's incredible.
It's exciting, isn't it? And I love the phrase that says, "If you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go further, go together." I think that's the way, Daniel. I love the way you think, and I definitely would love to be able to catch up. As I said, you know, beyond the podcast as well. And I think the audience is very, yeah, they're very lucky, I think, to have you and to be able to open up this opportunity for conversing what I think is essential in space that we don't talk much about, which is the sort of humanity and the interconnectedness.
Well, thank you very much, Sebastian. And yes, I look forward the next time. Our next conversation will be at the dinner, celebrating food, the human experience with a glass of bottle of wine, and then we continue there. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel.